Welcome back class. This is the 7th class of NCERT Indian Polity for Foundation Batch Adharshila conducted by Center for Ambition, and we are continuing with the second chapter, which is Rights in the Indian Constitution. So far we have seen that we have completed the fundamental rights. We have seen the detailed discussion. We had a detailed discussion on fundamental rights. We have seen the reasonable restrictions that are put on the fundamental rights, and we have also seen the exceptions that are mentioned in the constitution. Okay. So as we proceed further in the NCERT, we see that the NCERT, when it ends, it talks about DPSPs and differences between fundamental rights and DPSPs. So as we also proceed, we will also understand what are DPSPs, and we will also make a distinction between the fundamental rights and DPSPs in this very lecture. There is also a small box which is given in NCERT which talks about the fundamental duties, and as it is mentioned in the NCERT, it becomes important for us to also understand that. Okay, so I'll also tell you about the fundamental duties, what are fundamental duties and what duties we all citizens have. So beginning with, I'll be discussing about directive principles of state policy, which is our DPSPs. So DPSP is mentioned in part 4th of the constitution, and article 36 to article 51 enshrined in the constitution talks about DPSPs. Okay, so when I talk about DPSPs, they are not legally enforceable as we see our fundamental rights was. Okay, so fundamental right was legally enforceable. What does it mean to be legally enforceable? It means that in case of a fundamental right is violated, in case of fundamental right, any of a fundamental right is violated, you can always move to a Supreme Court, because Supreme Court is the guarantor of the fundamental rights. You can always move to a court in case of a fundamental right is violated to get a constitutional remedy. Okay, in case of DPSPs, we see on the other hand, DPSP does not mention any provision. Okay, it is not legally enforceable, which means that you cannot move to a court for your violation of DPSP. Why so? Because when we see our newly independent India, you imagine your newly independent India, which was which had a lot of challenges at that point of time. So the framers of the constitution, when they realized that there were lot of challenges in the society, one of the challenges I want to mention here is the inequality in the society. There was inequality in the society which was very prevalent at that point of time. Why? Because there was under when Britishers used to rule, okay, when there was a rule of Britishers, they formulated some policies, they implemented some policies, some laws which were exploitative in nature. For example, I talked about land revenue policy. Okay, when I talked about land revenue laws in my previous videos, you could recall that I talked about the inequality in the society that was spread because of it. Okay, there was a rich landlord that had concentration of wealth, and the poor peasant which had nothing. So there was a lot of inequality gap in the society that was spread by the exploitative policies and laws brought by Britishers in the country. So to minimize the equality level, to minimize the equality and to ensure the equality to all the citizens of the country, we need to make certain ideal objectives for the country so that the equality, the well-being of the country could be made sure. So as we proceed, we see that some very ideal objectives that we study in the DPSPs. DPSP had some very novel features, had some very ideal features. To implement that, we needed a lot of resources in the country. So as the framers of the constitution realized that there were many challenges in the country, they also realized that we had a limitation on the resources. We had a limited resources. So as we had not had adequate resources, as we did not had adequate resources, the framers of the constitution realized that as we have many challenges in the society, we do also have a limitation on the resources. We do not have adequate resources which can make our these ideal objectives that are in the society. Okay, the ideal objectives that we want to bring in the society, we do not have adequate resources to make them legally enforceable. For example, if we make it legally enforceable for people that whosoever has a concentration of wealth will be convicted, then we can have a lot of cases filed. Okay, we can have a lot of petition piled up in the court, and we do not have resources to provide justice to the citizen. So because we have a limitation on the resources, we had to keep them in the other section of the constitution, which makes them guidelines for the government. Okay, so DPSPs, what are DPSPs? DPSPs are guidelines for the government. They are the framework of the government to formulate policies and laws. Okay, so these are not legally enforceable. Why? Because we had not that adequate resources. We were very much deprived of the resources, that it was a task for us to bring justice to everybody, to bring justice to all the citizens of the country. So we have put them into under a special section, which is part 4 of the constitution, which makes them part 4 of the constitution, which makes them guidelines for the government. So these are, what are DPSPs? DPSPs are guidelines for the government. These are some frameworks of the government through which a government can formulate any policy and any law. Okay. They are extended from article 36 to 51. So directive principles, these are non-justiciable rights, which means that you cannot move to a court in case your violation of directive principle happens. Okay, for example, adequate livelihood, equal pay for equal work for men and women, right against economic exploitation, right to work, early childhood and care, education to children below the age of 6. So these are your some DPSPs. I'll talk more about them. Abhi we'll see every DPSPs that are mentioned in the constitution one by one. Okay. The policies, matlab we have some DPSPs, and they are, as I said, they are framework for the government to make laws. So there are some DPSPs which talk about uniform civil code. So we can see some policies that are in the country which are on uniform civil code. We have seen some laws in the country which are on the prohibition of consumption of alcohol liquor. Okay, promotion for cottage industries, prevention of slaughter of useful cattle. So these are some policies that are made on behalf of the DPSPs. Okay. Goals, what are the goals of DPSPs? They provide the welfare, they bring welfare of the people, social, economic and political justice, raising the standards of living and equitable distribution of resources, promotion of international peace. So these are some of the goals of the DPSPs which DPSP makes sure to bring in the society. Okay, so DPSP basically are there for the welfare of the people and to bring social, economic and political justice in the country. Moving on to the origin of DPSPs, as in the previous videos, if you could recall, when I told you about the borrowed features of the constitution, where we have borrowed different features of the constitution from different countries, what are prevalent, what is important in the different countries, when we have borrowed it. So we see that we have borrowed from Irish constitution the provision of DPSPs, which was copied by Spanish constitution. Okay, so we have taken it from the Irish constitution, and Irish people, the people of Ireland, have taken it from the Spain. Okay, so we have borrowed DPSPs from Irish constitution, and the Irish constitution itself borrows it from Spanish constitution. Okay. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar described them as a novel feature. So as DPSP is very ideal in the sense, it is very ideal in the origin. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has stated it as a novel feature of the constitution. Moving on to the features of the DPSPs, The first feature of the DPSP is they are ideals for the government. These are ideal objectives for the government to form policies on. DPSP describe the ideals that the state should follow while formulating the policies and enacting laws. As I told you before, that DPSPs are very important. They are the guidelines of the government. They provide the government a framework on which they can formulate policy and enact laws. They are also constitutional instructions. So, as they are not legally enforceable, we can say they are instructions to the government. Okay. They act as a constitutional instructions or recommendations to the legislature, executive and administrative authorities. So, these are recommendations to the legislature, executive and our administrative authorities. These are the constitutional instructions which gives them an instruction on which the policies have to be framed. Also, they are known as instrument of instructions, which is kind of same here, and it is like instrument of instructions were prevalent in Government of India Act 1935. So, they were in initially they were in Government of India Act 1935, which was mentioned as instrument of instructions. So, DPSPs in Government of India Act was mentioned as instructions, instruments of instructions, which was issued for the Governor General and governors under Government of India Act 1935. So, DPSPs was also prevalent before as instruments of instructions under Government of India Act 1935. Welfare state, the DPSPs ensures that there is well-being of the citizens. Okay, so they ensure there is a welfare state in the country, so that every citizen of the country could be could enjoy their rights. So, it establishes a welfare state in the society. DPSP establish a welfare state and not merely a police state. Okay, it does not establish a police state, establish a welfare state. Okay. Their objective is to establish economic and social democracy along with political democracy. So, as we have political democracy, we have seen in fundamental rights, we have political rights, we should also have social and economic democracy. So, DPSP, what does DPSP does? DPSPs ensures their objective is to establish an economic and social democracy in our country. They are non-justiciable in nature. It means that you cannot move to a court in case of your DPSPs are violated, because it cannot be violated because these are the frameworks for the government. So, it cannot be violated. These DPSPs are not enforceable by the courts. No citizen can approach the court for their direct implementation. So, the direct implementation cannot be held. You can only see the DPSPs in the society only by when the government make laws, when make policies on them. Okay, their direct implementation is not seen in the society. Some new directive principles were added later in the constitution. Okay, 4 DPSPs were added under Article 39 Part F, subclause F. We have seen provide Article 39 subclause F provide opportunities for the healthy development of children. So, Article 39 talks about the guideline for the government to make laws for healthy development of the children. Okay. Article 39A talks about to promote equal justice and provide free legal aid to the poor. Article 39A gives a guideline to the state to provide free legal aid to the poor. Article 43A, Article 43A ensures workers' participation in the management of industries. Okay, Article 38A, Article 48A talks about protection and improve the environment and safeguard forest and wildlife. Okay, so these are some DPSPs that were added. You have to be very much thorough with them. You have to keep in mind that what are the new 4 DPSPs were added and what were the DPSPs told about what are the basis for the government to make laws on. For example, this talks about the healthy development of children. So the state had to make laws for the development of the children, for a healthy development of the children. This talks about to bring the free legal aid to the poor. Okay, so these are the four new DPSPs which you have to make sure. 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978 added one more DPSP under Article 38, which is to minimize the inequality. Okay. So another DPSP was added under Article 38, which talks about minimizing the inequalities in the society. Article 36, 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. Constitutional Amendment Act 2002 talks about it inserted article 21A, right to education. Okay, in DPSPs, I'll give you the list of DPSPs. So in DPSP we see that there is a direction to the state relating to the early childhood care and education for the children below 6 years. So this DPSP was implemented, and 86th Constitutional Amendment was done in 2002, and which brought this DPSP into a law, and which inserted Article 21A as our law. ठीक है. So this जो feature था, this जो guideline थी, which was made into a law by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. So what does DPSP do? These are guidelines. The guidelines I have given you, these are some guidelines given to the state for formulating laws and policies. The law we have seen here, Article 21, it came because of the DPSP mentioned here, which talks about early childhood and education for children below 6 years. Okay. Before coming to the fundamental rights, I want to tell you the DPSPs mentioned in the Constitution. Okay. So you can see here the DPSPs from Article 36 to Article 51. The DPSPs, as I told you, are mentioned here. Article 36 talks about definition of state. It talks about definition of state. 37, application of the principles contained in this part. Okay. Wait a minute. What? Okay. Article 38 talks about, it states that state to ensure a social order for the promotion or welfare of the people. Okay. Article 39 talks about certain principle of policies to be followed by the state. Article 39A talks about legal justice and free legal aid. Okay. Article 40, organization of village panchayats. Article 41, right to work, to education and to public assistance in certain cases. Provision, Article 42 tells about the provision for just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. Article 43 talks about living wage, etc. for workers. Okay. Article 43A talks about participation of workers. Talks about participation of workers in management of industries. Article 43B talks about promotion of cooperative societies. 44 talks about uniform civil code for the citizens. Okay. Article 45, provision for early childhood care and education for children below age of 6 years. So here you see that we have a DPSP under Article 45, which talks about provision for early childhood care and education to children below the age of 6 years. So the Article 21A, which was inserted in the Constitution, was implementing this DPSP here. Okay. So we can see how DPSP makes importance in the Constitution, how it plays important role in the constitution when it comes to the formulating of laws. Okay. Article 46 is for promotion of educational and economic interest of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other weaker sections. Article 47 talks about duty of the state to raise the level of nutrition, okay, and the standards of living and improve public health. Article 48 talks about organization of agriculture and animal husbandries. So, if you can recall that there are some laws which that can come into your mind, which might see that the guidelines that are mentioned here are enacted through a law or a policy. If you can recall some of the policies that are made by the government, you can recall some of the schemes made by the government. Some of the policies, when I talk about the nutrition and health, so these are the guidelines that the government ensures when it makes some schemes also. Okay. Article 48 talks about protection and improvement of environment and safeguard of the forests and wildlife. Article 49 protection of monuments and places objects of national importance. Article 50 talks about separation of judiciary from executive. Article 51 promotion of international peace and security. So, these were all articles from 36 to 51 which we have seen talks about the directive principles to the state policy. Moving on to fundamental duties. So, fundamental duties is mentioned under part 4A of the constitution. Okay. There could be a question in your mind which can arise that when we talk about fundamental right and fundamental duties, the word fundamental is very common. So, why they are separated by DPSPs? Because when we see fundamental right is mentioned in part 3 of the constitution, I will tell you. Like fundamental right, if we see, is mentioned in part 3 of the constitution and DPSP is mentioned in part 4 of the constitution. Okay. And fundamental duties is mentioned in part 4A of the constitution. So, a question might come into your mind that why the both word with fundamental are separated by DPSPs. Okay. See, the reason here that we put fundamental duties after DPSP is because that fundamental rights and DPSPs are both our rights. Okay. These are rights that we have divided in two parts. For example, this talks about our political rights which are enforceable, and this is our social and economic rights which are not legally enforceable. So, constitutional framers made sure that the duties, this talks about duties, fundamental duties talks about our duties. So, these are rights. So, the constitution framers wanted to make sure that the duty should not come in between the rights. When we are talking about the rights in their constitution, they do not wanted fundamental duties to come here and separate the rights. They wanted the rights to come in a particular section and then we talk about the duties. So, we see that we have rights here and duties in the next part. Okay. So, fundamental duties are mentioned in part 4 of the constitution, 4A of the constitution, and these were not mentioned in the original constitution. These were added by 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, which is in 1976. Okay. And these are included under Article 51A. They were based on the recommendation of Singh committee. Sardar Singh committee was made up and which recommended fundamental duties to be added in the constitution by 42nd Amendment Act 1976. Initially, we had 10 fundamental duties which were added through 42nd Amendment, which is 1976, and 11th fundamental duty which we have is added by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, which is in 2002. Okay, Article 51A. So, our 11th fundamental duty was added by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act 2002. Now, our fundamental duties contains of 11 fundamental duties. Okay, so we have a list of 11 fundamental duties now when we talk about our fundamental duties part 4A in the constitution under article 51A. So here is a distinction between fundamental rights and DPSP. We will see the difference here. So fundamental rights are negative. Okay, wait a minute. Fundamental rights are negative. What does negative? I told you what do I mean by negative. When I say negative, negative means that they prohibit the state from doing certain things. I told you negative mean that state shall not. Okay, it does not mean that it is negative in the basic nature. It means that state shall not, means here some restrictions are put on the state so that citizens can enjoy their rights. Okay, so as I told you that these are positive in nature, which means that state shall, which means that there is nothing to do with their basic sense. It is a broader version when I talk about in polity, when I talk about Indian polity. So negative and positive has a broader sense, which means negative means that state shall not do these things so that the certain citizens can enjoy their certain rights. Okay, and positive means that the state shall do some things so that citizens can perform their certain rights. Okay, so fundamental rights are justiciable nature, in which it means that they are legally enforceable, which means that you can go to the court in case of their violation. Okay, directive principles are non-justiciable. They are not legally enforceable by the courts in case of their violation. Fundamental rights aim at establishing political democracy in the country, and these are establishing social and economic democracy in the country. These have legal sanctions. ठीक है, justiciable हैं तो legal sanctions होंगे, and these have moral and political sanctions. What does it mean? It means that DPSPs are very ideal in nature, that they have a moral and political sanctions. They promote welfare of the individual, hence they are personal and individualistic. They promote welfare of the community. So DPSPs are for the welfare of the state. Okay, whereas when we see fundamental rights, these are welfare, these are to promote the welfare for the individual. So these are individualistic in nature, and these are socialistic in nature. Okay, it is made for the society. It means that there is welfare in the society. So directive principles are welfare for the community. Fundamental rights do not require any legislation for the implementation. They are automatically enforced. So they are automatically enforced. There is no need for parliament to make certain laws on fundamental rights. There are some parts in the constitution, parts in the fundamental right which needs parliament to enforce laws, but when we talk about fundamental right as a whole, we see that it is automatically enforced. Parliament does not need to make laws in case to enforce them. But in case of directive principles, we see we require legislation for the implementation. They are not automatically enforced. It means that these are guidelines for the government to formulate policies on. So यहाँ पर legislature needs to make laws on them. So they have to be implemented by the legislature because they are not automatically enforced. The courts are bound to declare a law violative of any of the fundamental rights as unconstitutional and invalid. So what can courts do? Courts can declare any law as unconstitutional if the law violates fundamental rights. Whereas when we see directive principles, the courts cannot declare a law violative of any directive principles as unconstitutional and invalid. However, they can uphold the validity of a law on that it was enacted to give effect to the DPSPs. Okay. Here, the courts cannot declare a law itself as unconstitutional, as we see here in fundamental rights. The court can uphold the validity of a law. It can ask the validity of the law. It can put a question on the validity of law, but it cannot declare it unconstitutional, as in the case of fundamental rights we see here. Now, fundamental rights are civil and political in nature. Okay, we have discussed it. They are civil and political in nature. They are primarily individual rights, so they are made for the welfare of the individual. They are individualistic, so they are primarily individual rights. Their main focus is rights. Okay. In the case of DPSPs, they are social and economical rights. They are basically goals. These are framework. These are guidelines. Okay, their primary focus is duties of the state rather than the individual rights. So it makes sure there is a welfare of the state. It is made for the welfare of the state, for the community, rather than individual rights. Okay, it aims to establish a welfare state. So now rights and duties are when I talk about fundamental duties and fundamental rights. So when I talk about fundamental duties, so we see that duties and rights in the Indian Constitution are correlative. They are complementary to each other. For example, if you move to a court and you seek for a remedy for your right, if they are violated, then the court can also ask you that have you performed your duties as well. So in that case, your judgment could be there could be slight difference in your judgment if you have not performed your duties here. Okay, we have also in the constitution, when the constitution was framed, we have made sure to give the duties also an important part when we were framing our constitution. Okay, as compared to the rights, we have also given duties special provision. Here we have made rights and duties complementary to each other, which means that if you move to a court, the court can ask you that if you have fulfilled your duties as well. Okay, in the constitution, in the beginning, when the constitutional framers were making the constitution, they gave right the more importance than duties, because our rights were very much infringed during the time of British rule. We had a lot of exploitative laws and policies in the country which took away all of our rights. Okay, so the framers of the constitution realized the importance of having rights. So there is a little more importance given to the rights in the constitution than to the duties, because duties are also there, but the rights, we were being deprived of rights in the longer run. As we have seen the Britishers rule, we have seen that there were no respect of the rights that were given to the Indian citizen. So in the Indian constitution, we have given ourselves more rights, more protection to our rights than the duties. Okay, even though rights and duties are correlative, but rights have a more specific power when it comes to the duties. Okay, so origin of fundamental duties were inspired by the USSR. We have borrowed the provision of fundamental duties from USSR. Okay, but in the case of USSR, if I see, so they have given rights and duties equal value. So it's just the idea that we have taken from the USSR. We have not entirely adopted their fundamental duties provision. Okay, now we see, if we see the countries like US, Canada, France and Germany, they do not even have a fundamental duties wala concept. Okay, they do not have fundamental duties entirely in their constitution. Okay, only the Japanese constitution, if we see that originally the Japanese constitution, which was the only constitution which had the list of duties in its constitution. Okay, only the Japanese constitution had the list of duties in their original constitution and no other country had it. In the USSR constitution, there is a equal importance given to the rights and duties. Equal emphasis was placed on the rights and duties, and citizens were expected to discharge their duties responsibly. Okay, in India, we are also responsible for discharging our duties, but in our constitution, we have given importance to rights more than to the duties. Okay, this is the end of the video, and we have completed our second chapter here. We have completed our rights in the Indian Constitution, and in the next video, I'll be taking the third chapter of our NCERT, which is elections and representatives. So, we'll be continuing with the third, we'll be starting with the third chapter of the NCERT, which is elections and representatives. So, see you then. Thank you.